Chapter 10 Jadwiga Twice Crowned. The Polish white eagle on a red ground floated high above Wawel Castle. During this very week of her arrival, on October 15th, 1384, her name day, Jadwiga, was to be crowned. Court ladies were up at dawn. Never before, they thought, had there been a comparable queen to attend. She herself had waked before they, and with her thoughts not on the crown, but on Buddha. Very differently would this day dawn could but the three she loved share it. As her fingers slipped over her rosary beads, she lifted her thoughts to her father. How intimately he was following these hours. Often he had pictured to her coronation, not here in Wawel Cathedral, but in Hungary's coronation cathedral at Székesfehérvár. What was he thinking of the changes fate had ordained since he left them? She prayed for his blessing as she knelt before the crucifix. Then came the moment for which her dames and maidens of honor waited. Those chosen to prepare her for the day met now in her room. They spread on the bed her white robe and crimson mantle, and set the high-backed, square-toed sandals of red velvet embroidered with crosses of gold before it. They made suggestions about this, or that detailed the royal toilet, bent each on having a hand in arranging her hair and the veil to be folded back from her forehead. Jadwiga's full-blooded youth easily responded to this busy enthusiasm. Indeed, when a little later in the morning, Archbishop Bodzanta, with the three heads of administration, the commander of the castle, Dobislav, the Palatine, representing the whole Palatinate, and the governor, who administered the properties of the king and the state, along with other important nobles and ecclesiastics, arrived for a preliminary service in the chateau. She seemed to them the very incarnation of youth's buoyancy and loveliness. They were struck by a certain fine valiancy in her bearing. To Jadwiga, this preparatory ceremony must have seemed more real, perhaps actually more impressive than the elaborate one to follow. For in the cathedral, she would be too overcome by emotion stirred by the presence of the acclaiming company and by the memories of Poland's past, which already filled this loved pantheon, to realize fully what was happening to herself. Her father had been crowned before the high altar. Her uncle Casimir, with other kings and their queens, lay in the crypt below it. Each of the sacred objects in the treasury, the carved crystal chalices, the white mitre of St. Stanislaus, adorned by its double cross of blue, the silver reliquary filled with earth from the Holy Sepulchre, which had been presented to St. Jadwiga, for whom she was named. These things would add their suggestions of piety and devotion. So it was perhaps in this earlier hour that she was more aware than she would be later of her own part in the tremendous day. After the apartment had been sprinkled with holy water, all knelt, and in the stillness prayers were read. While this ceremony was in progress inside the palace, the scene outside was tumultuous. In the courtyard, on past the cathedral to the bastions, and along the curving hill road to the lower wall, surged the crowds that had been fortunate enough to pass the gate. Each lay or ecclesiastical representative of a province or city, each ambassador and princely foreign guest was accompanied by his suite. Repeatedly, the gathered thousands welcomed a belated company, a group of knights fresh from a border encounter, brothers come from a distant monastery. When finally, the archbishop, Castellan, governor, and others escorted Jadwiga, whose spreading crimson mantle was upborne by pages, from the castle portal down the steps of the courtyard, a wave of intensest emotion swept over the multitude. Eyes of young and old grew misty. Hearts beat faster at sight of her. Here was glowing youth whose feet had been forced from the carefree path of youth into the road which wise maturity rarely traveled successfully. But now as she walked, preceded by palatines carrying the royal scepter and coronation sword, protected by a glittering canopy held by high dignitaries, and followed by the abbesses and prioresses of convents and a crowd of courtiers carrying lighted candles. Her future appeared indeed roseate. At the cathedral portal, trumpeters with silver horns, stationed at either side of the wide-swung iron doors of King Casimir, heralded the approach of the procession. Inside, the three naves and many chapels were hung with tapestries and banners. The gloom was starred by 1,000 candle flames and shot by the wincing gleam of gold and silver. Besides Archbishop Bonzata and John, Bishop of Krakow, Dmitri of Esztergom, who had betrothed Jadwiga at Hainburg and had buried her father and crowned her sister Mary, and other Hungarian prelates who had escorted their princess to Poland, officiated at the altar. In the chapel at the right of the choir, King Louis's daughter was robed in the traditional alb, tunic, and damatique. The scepter and sword were laid upon the altar. Then she advanced through a glittering avenue of nobles toward the throne erected in the middle of the nave, near the tomb of St. Stanislaus. There her suite halted, and the mass began. Bells sounded. The chalice was lifted. Incense rose in clouds. Impressively, the action moved toward that oath on which centered the meaning of the scene. Before the gospel, Jadwiga approached the altar to hear the age-old question, winged with inextinguishable faith and hope. Would she promise to respect all the rights, the liberties, and privileges of the people? Her yes was clear, firm. Louis's daughter meant to keep that promise, as she understood it. She wanted people to be happy and free, to have homes, to be able to stay with their families. She never received the unction. She placed before the altar her offering of bread and wine in a golden receptacle. And following her example, each noble offered his. Then, as candles were lifted and music and the cries of children and men and women shook the air, and her whole being was swept by an answering emotion, she took her place on the throne. She was crowned king, not queen. But since her mother had neglected to return the king's crown, which her father had taken to Hungary, the heavy gold one with its pendant ribbons, now taken from the altar to the throne, had been hurriedly made in Krakow. 2 dignitaries held it over her head during the remainder of the ceremony. At its close, the jubilant cortege returned across the courtyard to the castle, where a state banquet, over which their new queen presided, ended the day. Later, an image of her as she appeared at this coronation was stamped on one of the seals which she attached to her documents, one of the most elaborate seals of her century. Executed in wax and ornamented with long green and red ribbons, it pictures her on the Gothic throne of the cathedral. In the wings at either side are angels, and in the 2 wings still beyond, arms of the most important Polish princely houses. The coronation ceremony was not yet complete, for in all that had passed so far, the Krakow burghers had had no part. The following day, again royally robed and attended, Jadwiga went from Wawel Hall down to the city. Her horse was led by pages as she rode, followed by her suite, from her castle across the wide-spreading courtyard, under the triple gateway, out past the cathedral and Benedictine cloister and school for the clergy, past the Thieves' Tower, to the terrace, which commanded a view over valley and hills to the horizon. Southward, beyond the Carpathians, lay Hungary, Buda, her mother, Mary. The road dropped down from the terrace along the southern hill face to the river level. Here the hillside was so steep that the earth above and below had to be held by retaining walls. But the road itself was pleasantly graduated. All round the base of the hill ran the protecting moat and wall, and everywhere were trees and shrubs still holding, on this 17th of October, their gold and russet of autumn. As the coronation procession moved slowly down along the Royal Hill Road, Jadwiga got a good view of the Skalka, that smaller Bishop's Hill, embraced forkwise by the river, on which Bishop Stanislaus had been murdered by King Boleslaus the Bold. The fortified island village with her uncle named after himself, Casimir Town, stood conspicuously at her right. There he had tried unsuccessfully to establish a university. Several other villages clustered near the capital. Casimir had often favored one or another of them in order to punish Krakow for some insubordination. Her eyes could follow for some distance the moat and many-towered wall of the waiting city. The cavalcade filed out through the gateway and past the buildings clustered near the Wawel entrance, past the sturdy church of St. Andrew, with its two octagonal towers. This church, with its great loft over the side aisle, capable of holding 150 persons, had more than once, the young queen knew, served as a refuge for kings and princes in time of trouble. Casimir's father, King Lokitek, after hiding there, had escaped over its walls. A little farther along she passed near the hospitable Franciscan monastery, but little divining the part it was soon to play in her life. Then, still following Castle Street, the procession came in a few minutes to the heart of the old town. For this chief city of the Grand Duchy of Krakow was indeed old. In the 9th century it had been a bishop's seat. Its palpitating center was the immense marketplace, one of the most extraordinary in Europe, flanked by palaces of the nobility and wealthy burghers. Today all were gay with banners and brilliant hangings, as were the long central clothier's hall, the city hall, near one end of the square, and the quaint little church of St. Adalbert at the other end, marking the place where Adalbert preached on his way to Prussia and a martyr's death. At the north side of the square, the church of St. Mary dominated the scene. A great shout rose from the immense concourse of men and women as Jadwiga approached along the route barred off for the royal procession. Today, burghers welcomed their queen, coming to be the second time crowned and sceptered, and to take the throne they had erected before their city hall. About it were grouped the mayor, accompanied by liveried archers armed with swords, the city councilors, judges, and other officials, 40 in number. When at last Jadwiga sat crowned under the October sky, the bannered facades of the flanking palaces again echoed the cries of the populace. Now she solemnly confirmed the rights and privileges of the city, and received the vows of its citizens. In each action, people felt a truly royal adequacy. This girl moved with an unself-consciousness that allowed her preparation to function. Here she was at last, face to face with her subjects, who were ready to love her, and in no anemic way. In her Slavic capital, the tide of vitality ran high. Its people were intense in their loyalties and their mystical adorations, as they were, indeed, in their immoralities. These, however, did not prevent them from trooping into the churches, into St. John's and St. Florian's, St. Nicholas's and the others, as dutifully as children. This multitude acclaiming her today represented a large population, possibly 500,000, which had seemed scarcely diminished when just before her time 20,000 had died of plague. It was a very mixed population, including rich Tatars, money-lending Jews, Armenians, and several other large foreign groups. Many had come from less tolerant hands to Casimir's friendly capital. The fact that he, himself a Catholic, had wisely instructed a Byzantine patriarch to found bishoprics under the Orthodox Church in Poland's Russian dominions was typical of his tolerance and had profoundly impressed the outside world. Krakowians ate much and danced long and fought hard. The brilliant costumes of the men scandalized more serious communities. Indeed, the feasts of wealthy merchants, which often rivaled those of the Wawel itself, had once been the cause of a sumptuary law which prohibited more than 5 courses and more than 30 dishes at wedding banquets. Jesters, too, were limited to 8, and the bride could receive no gifts of silk clothing. Many trades flourished. Trade was the strength of the city, as the guilds were the strength of trade. Jadwiga's father had early granted special favors to the residential capital, opening all the commercial routes to it. The powerful guilds had established themselves one after another, and towers built into the far circling city walls, where they added to their normal duties those of defense. They owned some 30 towers, and all were represented today: lace makers, tanners, bookbinders, rope makers, masons, brewers, butchers, bellows makers, joiners, silversmiths. A host of the cleverest artificers and tradesmen of the continent swelled the crowd. As Jadwiga sat on the throne before the city hall, cutting across her subjects' tumultuous acceptance of their queen shot the question, who will sit beside her? For most of them wanted a king, a strong king, who would protect them against the more powerful nobles of their own country, and the entire country against the dreaded invasions of the Order of Teutonic Knights and the Lithuanians. They were not thinking of the 14-year-old Prince of Austria.